The snow came down hard that Christmas Eve, turning Chicago's streets into something that almost looked peaceful. While families gathered around dinner tables and fireplaces, Min-jae Park stepped through the door of the North Star Cafe on the south side, looking for somewhere quiet to disappear for a few hours. The Korean crime lord had spent 15 years building a reputation for being untouchable. Tonight, with Christmas lights blinking in the windows and carols playing softly from somewhere in the back, that reputation felt heavier than usual. Behind the counter, Shauna Davis was going through the motions of her closing routine, moving slowly because going home meant facing an empty apartment that still echoed with everything she'd lost. Her daughter, Zara, sat in the corner working on a puzzle, completely unaware that the man in the designer coat carried more danger in his pocket than their whole neighborhood had seen in months. None of them knew that a little girl's simple question would tear down carefully built walls, change 3 lives completely, and prove that sometimes salvation shows up when you least expect it and need it most. The door chimed as Min-jae entered, shaking snow from his charcoal overcoat. The fabric was imported, the kind of quality that announced wealth before a word was spoken. His features were sharp, calculated, the face of someone who'd learned young that showing emotion meant showing weakness. At 33, Min-jae controlled Chicago's Korean criminal network with the kind of precision that made rivals nervous and allies careful. Third-generation Korean-American, he'd taken what his grandfather started and turned it into something that would have terrified the old man. The ink on his neck, a black tiger climbing toward his jaw in traditional style, marked him as someone who belonged to a world where loyalty meant blood and trust meant leverage. 3 buttons on his white dress shirt hung open, despite the freezing temperature outside, revealing the tiger's snarling face at his collarbone. He'd stopped noticing cold about 4 years ago. He'd stopped noticing most things. "We're still open," a woman's voice called out. It was warm, tired, carrying the kind of exhaustion that came from holding everything together when everything wanted to fall apart. Shauna emerged from behind the espresso machine, her dark skin glowing under the cafe's amber lighting. Her locks were pulled back in a thick ponytail, a few strands framing a face that would have been stunning if it wasn't shadowed by the kind of weariness that settled into your bones. She wore the cafe uniform, black shirt and dark jeans, like armor against a world that kept taking shots. "Coffee," Min-jae said, his voice carefully flat. "Black. I'll be staying a while if that works." "Booth or counter?" "Booth. Back corner. Away from the glass." Instincts didn't fade just because it was Christmas Eve. Shauna's eyes swept over him quickly, cataloging details the way she'd learned to before trouble arrived. Expensive clothes, confident stance, hands that had never seen hard labor, eyes that carried shadows permanent enough to be tattoos themselves. "Corner's all yours," she said evenly. "Coffee's coming up." As Min-jae moved past the counter, a small voice piped up from near the kitchen. "Mama, can I have more apple juice?" "In just a minute, baby. Let me help this gentleman first." Min-jae's stride hitched, barely noticeable, but there. He hadn't expected a child. The cafe should have been empty, a sanctuary from noise and people and expectations. Instead, there was this little girl with her puzzle pieces and her innocent presence, interrupting his carefully planned solitude. He settled into the farthest booth, the one that gave him clear sight lines to both exits. The tiger tattoo seemed to pulse in the flickering light, its stripes rendered in such detail that some people swore they could see it breathe. Shauna brought his coffee in a plain white mug. No small talk, no forced cheer. "Let me know if you need anything else." "Thank you." He wrapped his hands around the cup's heat, staring into the black surface like it held answers he'd stopped asking for years ago. From her position wiping down the counter, Shauna watched him with the particular attention of a mother who'd developed radar for danger. This man radiated it like heat from pavement in summer. Everything about him screamed power, money, and the kind of control that came from making hard choices and sleeping fine afterward. But there was something else too. Something in how he held himself separate from everything. Loneliness, maybe. Or grief wearing an expensive disguise. Mama, Zara's voice carried across the empty space. Why does that man look so sad? Hush, baby. That's not our business. Shauna's voice held gentle correction, but she couldn't help glancing back at the corner booth. The man sat perfectly motionless, coffee going cold between his palms, staring at nothing with the kind of focus that meant he was seeing everything he didn't want to see. Outside, snow kept falling, softening Chicago's hard edges into something kinder. Inside the North Star Cafe, 3 people occupied the same space, but lived in completely different universes. Shauna went back to her closing tasks, counting the register with practiced speed. Zara returned to her puzzle, fitting pieces together with determined focus, and Minjae sat in his corner wrapped in isolation he'd built himself, convinced that this night would pass like all the others, marked by absence instead of presence, by what was missing instead of what might be found. He was wrong. The first crack wouldn't come from a rival's gun or a federal investigation. It would come from a 7-year-old girl with beads in her braids and a heart too generous for a world this cold. But that moment still waited ahead, gathering momentum like snow before an avalanche. For now they simply existed in their separate worlds, unaware that Christmas Eve in Chicago would prove that some walls, no matter how carefully built, couldn't survive the assault of innocent kindness. The cafe's ancient heater rattled and hummed, fighting against December. Shauna's hands moved through familiar patterns, wiping, stacking, organizing. Zara's fingers worked puzzle pieces together, creating order where before there was only chaos, and Minjae sat in his $1,000 suit behind his invisible walls, a man who'd forgotten that being untouchable meant being completely alone. 25 minutes passed in near silence. Shauna moved around the cafe in a rhythm that was almost musical. The soft clink of clean mugs being stacked, the quiet pad of her shoes on worn tile, the occasional murmur as she answered Zara's questions about the puzzle she was building. Minjae ordered another coffee, then a third. Each time Shauna brought it without comment, maintaining professional distance. She'd learned not to ask questions about customers who looked like contradictions. Designer watches in working-class neighborhoods, expensive jewelry checking time that clearly meant nothing, eyes that tracked every movement but seemed to see nothing that mattered. "We close in 30 minutes, she said on her 4th trip to his table, her tone neither warm nor cold. "You're welcome to stay till then." "Understood." His gaze lifted to meet hers, and for a moment something flickered there. Not recognition exactly, but awareness of the particular exhaustion she carried, the kind that came from fighting battles nobody else could see. After she walked away, Minjae found himself watching the interaction between mother and daughter. Not obviously, years of training made sure he never revealed what he observed, but with growing attention. "Mama, will Santa know where we are?" Zara's voice held concern that twisted something in Minjae's chest. "We moved and he might get confused." "Santa knows everything, baby. He's got magic for that." Shauna's voice held the particular firmness of someone willing something to be true. "Now finish your puzzle. We need to catch the bus soon. Can't we get an Uber?" "It's snowing really bad." "Bus is fine, Zara. Don't argue tonight, please." The exchange told Minjae everything. Single mother working Christmas Eve for whatever extra money she could scrape together, living somewhere that required bus rides through snowstorms, making promises about Santa while wearing shoes that had been resold at least twice, fighting to give her daughter a childhood the world seemed determined to steal. He recognized the fight. His own mother had waged the same battle before a heart condition took her when he was 11. She'd worked herself into an early grave trying to keep him fed, clothed, enrolled in the private school she believed would save him from the streets. It hadn't. Nothing could have saved him from what he became, but she tried. That had to count for something. "Sweetheart, I'm going to do final cleanup," Shauna called to Zara. "Stay in your booth and don't bother the gentleman, okay?" "Okay, Mama." While Shauna disappeared into the kitchen, Min-jae pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages that detailed his empire's movements. A shipment clearing customs at the port, a territorial issue in Wicker Park, a rival organization making noise about respect and boundaries, the usual chaos that demanded his constant attention. His second-in-command had sent 8 messages in the last hour, each one more insistent. Where was he? They had business. Christmas didn't stop operations. In fact, it accelerated them. People sought comfort in escapes, and Min-jae's organization provided everything from gambling to protection to substances that made harsh reality bearable. He should respond, should leave this cafe and return to the penthouse downtown where his lieutenants waited with updates, problems, decisions that only he could make. Should stop pretending that sitting in a struggling coffee shop changed anything about who he was or what his life had become. But the snow kept falling and the cafe's warmth held him like an anchor. And for reasons he couldn't articulate, walking out that door felt like admitting defeat to something he couldn't name. Movement caught his attention. The little girl, Zara, her mother had called her, had slid out of her booth and was walking toward his table. Shauna was still in the kitchen, the sound of running water indicating she'd started washing dishes. Min-jae's body tensed automatically. He wasn't good with children, didn't know how to talk to them, what to say, how to be anything other than what he was. And what he was would terrify any sensible child. "Hi, mister," Zara said, stopping a respectful distance from his table. She wore a purple sweater decorated with silver stars, her hair pulled into 2 puffs secured with colorful beads. Her brown eyes held the particular clarity of someone who hadn't learned yet that the world demanded you hide what you felt. "I'm Zara. What's your name?" "Min-jae." The name felt strange without titles or honorifics. Just a name, given to a child who wouldn't know it belonged to someone dangerous. "That's a cool name. Is it Korean?" "We learned about Korea in school. They invented really cool things and have amazing food." Her eyes widened with sudden excitement. "Are you from Korea?" "My friend Destiny's grandparents are from Korea, and they make the best dumplings ever." Despite everything, despite the walls and the control and the careful distance he maintained from human connection, Min-jae felt his mouth curve into something that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't nothing either. "I was born here," he said. "In Chicago. But my parents came from Korea. That's like my friend Marcus. His family came from Nigeria. His mom makes jollof rice that's so good." Zara's enthusiasm was completely genuine, her worldview still innocent enough to see connections instead of differences. "Do you have family here?" "No. They passed away." "Oh." The sympathy in her voice was real, uncomplicated by adult awkwardness. "I'm sorry. I don't have a daddy anymore either. He died when I was 5. The casual mention of loss hit harder than Min-jae expected. "I'm sorry too." "It's okay. Mama says Daddy's watching over us from heaven and he'd want us to be happy. So we try really hard to be happy even when it's difficult." She tilted her head, studying him with the intensity of children who haven't learned that staring is rude. "You look like things are difficult for you too. Are you trying to be happy?" The question pierced through layers of carefully constructed defenses, finding vulnerable places Min-jae believed were completely sealed. When had anyone last asked him about happiness? When had he last considered it a goal rather than a weakness? He stopped, unsure how to answer. His phone buzzed again, another message from the world demanding his attention, but he didn't reach for it. "That's a complicated question." "Adults always say that," Zara said wisely. "But I think it's actually pretty simple. Either things make you happy or they don't. And if they don't, maybe you should do different things." "Is that what your mother teaches you?" "No, that's what I figured out myself. Mama teaches me to be strong and kind and work hard. But happiness, she considered seriously, I think we have to choose that ourselves." Before Min-jae could respond to this unexpectedly profound observation, Shauna emerged from the kitchen, concern flashing across her face as she spotted her daughter at the stranger's table. Zara Davis, what did I tell you? Her voice held gentle reproach as she quickly crossed the cafe. I'm so sorry, sir. She knows better than to bother customers. She's not bothering me. The words surprised them both. Shauna because she'd expected polite dismissal, Min-jae because he meant them. But Shauna was already ushering Zara back to their booth, her protective instincts overriding social niceties. This was her daughter, her responsibility, her fierce determination to keep safe in a world that had already taken too much. Go get your things together, baby, Shauna told Zara, her hand gentle on her daughter's shoulder. We need to catch the 9:15 bus. After Zara scampered off to gather her belongings, Shauna turned back to Min-jae, something protective and challenging in her posture. Look, I don't know who you are or what you're dealing with tonight. I'm not dealing with anything. Everyone who sits alone in a cafe on Christmas Eve is dealing with something. Her voice held the particular wisdom of someone who'd done her own share of dealing. But my daughter is off limits. She's friendly. She doesn't understand that not everyone is safe, and I need you to know that whatever's going on with you, she's not part of it. Min-jae studied her, really looked at her for the first time. Beneath the exhaustion and weariness, he saw strength, the kind forged in fire, tested by loss, refined by a mother's desperate love. She was protecting her child the only way she knew how, with the only weapons she had, boundaries, words, the fierce determination to be enough. I understand, he said quietly. And I respect that. Your daughter is intelligent and brave. You're raising her well. The unexpected compliment seemed to disarm Shauna slightly. Thank you. She's everything to me. A pause, something vulnerable flickering across her features before she reinforced her walls. If you're planning to stay much longer, I'll need to ask you to leave. We close in 15 minutes. Of course. Min-jae reached for his wallet, pulling out several bills for the coffee. Shauna's eyes widened at the amount, easily 6 times what 3 cups of coffee cost, even with a generous tip. Sir, I can't. It's Christmas Eve. Consider it a holiday tip. He stood, retrieving his coat with practiced grace. Thank you for the coffee and the hospitality. We didn't really talk. No, he agreed, something shifting in his expression. But your daughter did, and it was enlightening. He was halfway to the door when it happened. Zara had climbed onto her booth to retrieve her jacket from the hook, her small body stretching for the fabric just out of reach. The booth was old, the vinyl seat worn smooth from years of use. Her foot slipped. She fell backward, the angle wrong, her head aimed directly for the table's sharp corner. Min-jae moved without thinking, pure instinct overriding calculation. He crossed the space in 3 rapid strides, catching Zara before she hit, his arms secure around her small frame as he absorbed the impact of her fall. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then Zara giggled, completely oblivious to the danger she'd been in, delighted by the unexpected adventure. Whoa, that was like flying. Zara. Shauna rushed over, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Oh my God, baby, are you okay? I'm fine, Mama. The mister caught me. Zara beamed up at Min-jae, completely trusting, absolutely certain of her safety in his arms. Min-jae carefully set her down, his hands trembling slightly, a reaction that would have alarmed his lieutenants who'd never seen him display physical evidence of emotion. You should be more careful. I will, Zara promised, then threw her arms around his waist in an impulsive hug. Thank you for saving me. The embrace lasted maybe 3 seconds. 3 seconds during which Min-jae stood frozen, arms awkwardly suspended, having absolutely no idea how to respond to this spontaneous display of affection from a child who didn't know what he was. When Zara pulled back, still smiling, Min-jae met Shauna's gaze. She looked shaken, her professional distance shattered by maternal terror and gratitude. Thank you, she said, her voice unsteady. If you hadn't been there. But I was. He retrieved his coat again, needing to leave before this moment became something he couldn't walk away from. Be careful getting home. The roads are dangerous tonight. We're taking the bus. Shauna stopped, something in his expression making her reconsider finishing that sentence. The bus. In this weather. It wasn't a question. Min-jae looked out at the snow falling heavier now, coating the streets in treacherous white. Where do you live? That's not your concern. Humor me. Shauna's jaw set stubbornly. She didn't owe this stranger explanations, didn't need his judgment or his pity. But something about the way he'd caught Zara, the careful gentleness of his movements, made her answer despite her better judgment. Englewood. About 45 minutes on the bus. Longer tonight. Min-jae pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. I'm calling you a car service. Absolutely not. It's already done. The car will be here in 5 minutes. He held up a hand as she started to protest. Considerate payment for the conversation your daughter gave me. Fair exchange. I don't accept charity. It's not charity. It's basic human decency on a night when a mother and daughter shouldn't be waiting for buses in a snowstorm. His voice held authority that didn't invite argument. Besides, I own the car service. It's no inconvenience. The admission hung in the air, the first real piece of information he'd offered about himself. Shauna's eyes narrowed, reassessing him with new context. A man who owned car services, wore custom suits, and sat alone in working-class cafes on Christmas Eve. Who are you? She asked quietly. Someone passing through. Min-jae buttoned his coat, preparing to step back into the winter night. Someone who's grateful your daughter reminded me that kindness still exists. Before Shauna could respond, before she could thank him or question him, or tell him she had everything under control, Zara's voice cut through the tension. Mister, the little girl had been quiet during the exchange, watching with the particular attention of children who understand more than adults credit them for. Why are you crying? The question stopped everything. Min-jae's hand went to his face automatically, fingers finding wetness on his cheeks that he hadn't noticed. When had the tears started? During the catch? During the hug? During the realization that this child's easy trust was something he'd never earn if she knew the truth? He couldn't remember the last time he'd cried. Years, certainly. Maybe since his mother's funeral, when he'd been 11 and determined to prove he was strong enough to survive without her. The tears felt foreign on his skin, a weakness he couldn't afford, evidence of cracks in armor that needed to remain impenetrable. I'm not, he started, but stopped. Lying to her felt wrong. Zara moved closer, her small hand reaching out to take his much larger one. The gesture was natural, guileless, offered with the particular generosity of someone who didn't understand that comfort was something you rationed carefully. It's okay to be sad sometimes, she said seriously. Mama says tears are just feelings that overflow when we try to keep them all bottled up. She says it's braver to let them out than to pretend they're not there. Min-jae looked at this child, 7 years old, living in Englewood, taking buses through snowstorms, missing her father, celebrating Christmas with worn puzzles and hope, and saw a kind of courage he'd never possessed. The courage to remain soft in a world that demanded hardness, to offer kindness when experience taught withholding, to believe in goodness despite evidence to the contrary. Don't cry, mister, Zara said gently, squeezing his hand. You can borrow my mom if you need one. She gives really good hugs and she always makes things better. The offer, so innocent, so generous, so completely impossible, broke something fundamental inside Min-jae Park. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet certainty of ice cracking beneath spring's first warmth. Shauna saw the precise moment the stranger's control shattered. Saw his chest hitch, his jaw clench, his eyes close briefly against whatever memory Zara's words had summoned. When he opened them again, they held raw vulnerability that made him look years younger, less dangerous, more human. That's very kind, he managed, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. But I should go. Your car is waiting. He was right. Through the cafe's front window, a sleek black sedan had pulled up to the curb, completely out of place in this neighborhood. The driver got out, opening the rear door in a display of service Shauna had only ever seen in movies. "Come on, baby," Shauna said, gathering their belongings with quick efficiency. "Let's get you home." But Zara wasn't ready to leave. She stood on her tiptoes, tugging gently at Min-jae's sleeve until he bent down to her level. Then, with the particular solemnity of someone performing an important ritual, she wrapped her arms around his neck and hugged him fiercely. "Merry Christmas, mister," she whispered. "I hope you find something that makes you happy." When she pulled back, Min-jae's carefully constructed mask had completely disintegrated. He looked at this child like she was something precious and fragile, something he wanted to protect, but didn't know how. "Merry Christmas, Zara," he said quietly. Then, looking up at Shauna, "Take care of each other." "We always do," Shauna replied, something unspoken passing between them, recognition maybe of two people who'd learned survival the hard way and carried scars the world couldn't see. Min-jae watched them settle into the car, Zara pressing her face against the window and waving enthusiastically until the sedan disappeared into the snowy night. Then he stood alone in the empty cafe, surrounded by Christmas decorations that seemed to mock his isolation. His phone buzzed insistently, more messages from his second-in-command, a situation developing that required his immediate attention, rivals making moves while he wasted time on sentiment. But Min-jae didn't move. Not yet. Instead, he walked back to the booth where Zara had been working on her puzzle, finding the picture she'd left behind. A drawing on the back of a napkin, stick figures in bright colors holding hands beneath a smiling sun. 3 figures, a woman, a child, and next to them, added in darker colors, a taller figure with something that might have been a tiger climbing up his neck. She'd drawn him into her family. The realization settled in his chest with unexpected weight. This child, who'd known him for less than an hour, had seen something worth including in her perfect world, had offered him belonging without conditions, comfort without questions, acceptance without judgment. And he was a man who destroyed things, who built empires on fear and maintained control through calculated violence, who learned at his grandfather's knee that mercy was weakness and emotion was a liability that got you killed. What could he possibly offer a child like Zara except contamination? Min-jae pulled out his phone, this time not to check messages from his organization, but to make a different kind of call. "Taehyun," he said when his most trusted lieutenant answered. "I need information on someone." "Shauna Davis, works at North Star Cafe on South Ashland. Find out everything. Where she lives, her financial situation, any debts, any threats. And I want it done quietly. No one approaches her, no one contacts her. Just information. Boss is everything. Just do it, Tae. And send me the patrol routes for Englewood. I want to know which streets are being watched and which ones aren't." After ending the call, Min-jae made another, this one to the car service manager. "The woman and child I just sent home, make sure the driver waits until they're safely inside. Then I want regular service arranged. Nothing obvious, nothing that would frighten them. Just make sure they're not taking buses in snowstorms." The arrangements took 10 minutes. By the time he finished, his organization's normal operations had been temporarily suspended, his lieutenants ordered to handle routine business without him. His entire focus shifted to something he couldn't quite name, but felt with absolute certainty. Min-jae locked the cafe door behind him. Shauna had left him the keys, trusting him to secure the place, another small gesture of faith that felt monumental, and stepped into the Chicago night. The snow had stopped, leaving the city draped in pristine white. Christmas lights twinkled in windows, families gathered around tables visible through sheer curtains, the world celebrating a holiday that had never felt further from Min-jae's reach. But something had changed. Some fundamental shift in how he saw his place in the universe, triggered by a child's innocent compassion and a mother's fierce protection. He'd spent 15 years building walls, constructing defenses, ensuring that nothing and no one could touch whatever remained of his humanity. 15 years convinced that isolation equaled strength, that detachment equaled survival. One 7-year-old girl had demolished those convictions in under an hour. His phone rang. Taehyun with preliminary information. Boss, I've got basic details. Shauna Davis, 29, widow. Husband died 3 years ago in a construction accident. She works 3 jobs, cafe, cleaning service, weekend retail. Lives in Englewood, rental apartment, current on payments, but barely. No debts beyond normal bills, no criminal record, no red flags. And the daughter, Zara Davis, 7, second grade, good student, no issues, attends public school in their district. Everything Tae said painted a picture Min-jae had already assembled from observation, a woman fighting impossible odds with nothing but determination, raising a daughter who somehow remained full of light despite circumstances that should have dimmed her spirit. What else? Min-jae asked, because Tae's tone suggested more. The building they live in, it's in territory that's being contested. Not by us, we stay out of residential zones, but the Volkov family has been expanding, and there's been pressure on landlords to sell. Nothing violent yet, but it could escalate. The information crystallized something in Min-jae's mind. He'd asked Tae for patrol routes, for protection possibilities, but he hadn't admitted why, hadn't articulated the fierce protectiveness that had awakened when Zara fell, when she hugged him, when she offered to share her mother with a stranger because she couldn't bear to see someone sad. I want that building and the surrounding block under passive watch, Min-jae ordered. Nothing obvious, I don't want them knowing, but if the Volkovs make any moves, I want to know immediately. And Tae, this stays between us. Understood, boss. Should I ask why we're protecting civilians in Englewood? No, Min-jae's voice held finality. You shouldn't. Christmas morning arrived with clear skies and brutal cold. In her small apartment in Englewood, Shauna woke early as she always did, her body trained by years of multiple jobs to maximize every waking hour. Zara still slept, curled beneath blankets decorated with cartoon characters, her face peaceful in the gray morning light. On the floor beside her bed sat the modest pile of presents Shauna had managed to scrape together, a few gently used books from the thrift store, new crayons and a sketch pad, a warm winter coat that was practical rather than exciting, but desperately needed. Not much by any standard, but everything Shauna could provide, bought with money earned from extra shifts and careful budgeting and the particular mathematics of poverty where every dollar required calculation. She was brewing coffee when someone knocked on the door. Shauna froze. Nobody knocked at 7 in the morning on Christmas. Nobody knew their address except her supervisor at the cafe, the school, and the stranger from last night, the man with the expensive coat and the tiger tattoo and the eyes that held too many shadows. The man who'd called them a car and left Zara's drawing behind like evidence of some crime he couldn't quite confess to. She checked the peephole, heart pounding, half expecting to see him standing there with whatever truth he'd been hiding. Instead, she found a delivery person holding a massive stack of wrapped packages, looking somewhat bewildered by the early hour and the address. Shauna Davis, the woman asked when Shauna cautiously opened the door. Yes, delivery for you and Zara Davis. Sign here, please. The packages kept coming. Toys, clothes, books, art supplies, everything carefully chosen, age-appropriate, exactly what a 7-year-old girl might want. And for Shauna, grocery gift cards, a winter coat in her exact size, an envelope containing cash with a simple note, for the bus rides you won't need to take. From a friend. No name, no explanation, just generosity that felt both overwhelming and somehow inevitable. Shauna knew who'd sent them, knew with absolute certainty that the stranger from North Star Cafe had somehow arranged this, had made decisions about her daughter's Christmas based on one brief conversation and whatever he'd observed in that hour. She should feel violated, angry that someone had inserted themselves into her life without permission, had investigated them enough to know addresses and sizes and needs. should recognize this for what it probably was. The dangerous interest of someone who lived in a world she wanted nothing to do with. But all she felt was the particular ache of being seen, of having her struggles recognized and addressed without judgment, without requirement for gratitude or repayment. "Mama," Zara appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Why are there so many presents?" Shauna struggled for explanation. "Someone sent them." "A friend." "The sad mister from the cafe?" Zara's face lit up with delight rather than suspicion. He wasn't sad anymore then. He must have found something that made him happy. The innocent conclusion twisted something in Shauna's chest. Her daughter's worldview remained uncomplicated by adult cynicism, still believed that kindness existed without ulterior motives, that strangers could become friends through simple human connection. Maybe she was right. Maybe the man with the tiger tattoo and the expensive coat had found something that made him happy, not in the presents themselves, but in the giving. In connecting with two people who'd reminded him that walls built for protection could also become prisons of isolation. The days after Christmas brought subtle changes to Shauna's world. The car service appeared regularly, drivers who claimed their company provided free rides to cafe employees as a holiday promotion. Her landlord suddenly reduced her rent, citing a calculation error in the original amount. The cafe manager gave her a raise, insisting she'd earned it, though Shauna knew the timing was suspiciously convenient. She wasn't naive, recognized the invisible hand arranging circumstances, smoothing paths, removing obstacles with efficiency that suggested resources and influence she couldn't match. She should be frightened, should recognize danger in generosity this coordinated, this comprehensive. But Zara bloomed under the reduced stress, smiled more easily, worried less about their tight budget, started bringing home better grades because she wasn't exhausted from long bus rides and cold walks. And Shauna found herself sleeping better, eating regularly, remembering what it felt like to not constantly operate in survival mode. The stranger never appeared, never contacted her directly, never demanded acknowledgement or gratitude, just helped quietly, efficiently, without fanfare or expectation. Until New Year's Eve, when Shauna worked another closing shift at North Star Cafe. The bell above the door chimed at 10 o'clock, and there he was. Same expensive coat, same carefully controlled expression, same shadows in his eyes. But something had shifted. Some fundamental change in how he carried himself, a softness around the edges that hadn't existed before. "Coffee?" Shauna asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Please." He hesitated, something vulnerable crossing his features. "And conversation, if you're willing." Shauna glanced at Zara doing homework in her usual booth, then back at this man who'd changed their lives without asking permission. "I think we're due for a conversation." She poured 2 coffees, settled across from him in the booth, and waited. Whatever came next, confession, explanation, the truth about who he was and what he wanted, she'd face it the way she faced everything, with courage forged in hardship and a mother's fierce determination to protect what mattered most. "I need to tell you something," Minjae began, his hands wrapped around the coffee cup like it provided necessary anchor. "About who I am, what I do, and why I can't seem to walk away from a cafe where a little girl reminded me that I used to be human." "I'm listening," Shauna said quietly. And despite every warning instinct, every lesson learned about men who appeared too good to be true, she found herself genuinely willing to hear his story. Whatever came next, they'd face it together or not at all, because some walls, once breached, couldn't be rebuilt, and some connections, once made, proved stronger than all the reasons to stay apart. 6 months later, Zara's 8th birthday fell on a Saturday bright with summer sunshine. The party took place not in their Englewood apartment, but in the private garden of a Gold Coast penthouse that Shauna still couldn't quite believe she had access to. Minjae had been honest that New Year's Eve, brutally, completely honest about his organization, his past, the empire built on activities that existed in legal gray zones and moral darkness. He'd expected her to run, to take Zara and disappear from his life with justified fear. Instead, Shauna had asked 3 questions. Do you hurt innocent people? Do you traffic in anything that destroys families? Will you ever bring this violence to my daughter? His answers, no, never, and I'd die first, had been enough. Not because Shauna was naive, but because she'd learned to recognize truth when she heard it, especially truth that costs something to admit. Their relationship had grown slowly, carefully, with Zara's well-being as the constant center. Min-jae never pushed, never demanded more than Shauna offered, never tried to replace the father Zara had lost. Instead, he became something else, a presence, a protector, eventually a partner in the careful work of building family from fractured pieces. Now, watching Zara laugh with her friends, wearing the birthday dress she'd chosen herself, surrounded by joy and security and love, Shauna felt the particular piece of someone who'd survived impossible odds and found unexpected grace. She's happy, Min-jae said quietly, appearing at Shauna's elbow with his customary silence. 6 months together, and he could still move like a shadow when he chose. She is. Shauna leaned into his shoulder, the gesture natural now, earned through countless conversations and shared meals, and the slow building of trust. We both are. His arm settled around her waist, the tiger tattoo on his neck visible above his collar, a mark of his past that he no longer tried to hide. I never thought I'd have this. Family, belonging, purpose beyond power. A little girl offered to share her mother, Shauna reminded him, her voice warm with remembered wonder. How could you resist? Across the garden, Zara looked up and waved enthusiastically, her smile bright enough to rival the summer sun. Min-jae waved back, something soft and unguarded crossing his features, the expression of a man who'd found redemption in the last place he expected. He'd never be perfect, would always carry shadows from a past he couldn't erase. But he'd learned something that Christmas Eve: walls built for protection could also become prisons. And sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was accept the gift of being seen. Don't cry, mister, Zara had said. You can borrow my mom. She'd given him so much more than borrowed comfort. She'd given him a reason to believe that even the most carefully constructed armor could be dismantled, that even the most damaged hearts could learn to trust again, and that family was something you built, not something you were born into. Christmas in Chicago had brought snow and isolation and a chance encounter that changed everything. Summer brought celebration, joy, and the particular peace of knowing that sometimes the best gifts came wrapped in the most unexpected packages. 3 people who'd been alone had found each other, and that, Min-jae thought as Zara ran over to pull him toward the birthday cake, was a miracle worth more than any empire he could build. The party continued into the evening, children running through the garden while parents chatted and watched with the relaxed vigilance of people who felt safe. Min-jae found himself doing things he'd never imagined, helping with party games, cutting cake, laughing at 7-year-old jokes that weren't particularly funny, but were delivered with such enthusiasm they became hilarious anyway. You're good at this, Shauna said later, after the guests had left and Zara had fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted from excitement. Being part of a family. I'm learning, Min-jae said, carrying Zara to the guest room that had become hers on the nights they stayed over. From the best teachers. He tucked her in gently, this little girl who'd seen past his walls and decided he was worth saving. Her beads clicked softly against the pillow as she settled deeper into sleep, one hand clutching the stuffed tiger he'd given her that morning, a joke she'd found delightful rather than frightening. Back in the living room, Shauna had poured wine and settled onto the balcony overlooking the city. Min-jae joined her, the summer night warm and clear, Chicago spreading out below them in a glittering display of lights and life. Do you ever regret it? He asked quietly. Letting us into your life? Taking this risk? Shauna considered the question seriously, the way she approached everything that mattered. Every relationship is a risk. Every connection is a chance for hurt. But the alternative is staying alone, staying safe, staying small. She turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the city lights. You taught me that, you know. Or Zara did, through you. How? You could have walked away that night. Should have, probably, given who you are and what you do. But you didn't. You chose connection over safety, chose to be vulnerable even though it terrified you. She reached for his hand. That takes more courage than any kind of power or control. That's real strength. Min-jae lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. I was drowning before I walked into that cafe. I just didn't know it. Didn't know that success without connection is just expensive loneliness. And now? Now I know that a 7-year-old girl understood more about life in her few years than I learned in 33. That kindness is its own kind of power. That letting people in doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city breathe and pulse below them. Somewhere in that sprawling metropolis, Min-jae's organization continued its operations, managed by lieutenants who'd learned to handle most issues without him. He still made the important decisions, still maintained control, but the empire that had once consumed his entire existence now occupied only part of his attention. The rest belonged to a woman who'd chosen to see possibility instead of danger, and a little girl who'd offered to share her mother with a stranger because she couldn't stand to see someone sad. What are you thinking about? Shauna asked, noticing his distant expression. About Christmas Eve. About how close I came to walking out that door before Zara fell. If she hadn't slipped, if I hadn't caught her, if she hadn't hugged me. He trailed off, considering the alternate timeline where none of this existed. But she did, and you did, and she did, Shauna said firmly. We don't live in the world of what-ifs. We live in the world of what is. And what is pretty damn good. Yeah, Min-jae agreed, pulling her closer. It really is. Inside, Zara stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about puzzles and tigers and happiness, her unconscious mind processing a birthday that had exceeded her wildest expectations. She'd never know how close the man she called Min had come to being lost forever that Christmas Eve, never understand the transformation that had occurred in a struggling cafe on the south side. She just knew that her family had grown, that her mother smiled more, that the sad mister from the cafe had found his happiness after all, and it looked a lot like them. As the night deepened and the city's lights began to fade under the approaching dawn, 3 people who'd been strangers 6 months ago slept under the same roof. A former crime lord learning to choose love over power, a widow learning to trust again after loss, and a little girl who'd proven that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest transformations. Christmas Eve had brought an ending and a beginning, wrapped together in snow and solitude and a child's generous heart. Summer brought continuation, growth, the daily work of building something real from unexpected pieces. And if you asked Min-jae Park what his greatest achievement was, he wouldn't mention his empire or his wealth or his power. He'd tell you about a little girl with beads in her braids who'd offered to share her mother, and how that simple gesture of compassion had saved his life. Because some walls, no matter how carefully constructed, no matter how many years spent building them, can't withstand the determined assault of innocent love. And sometimes the most dangerous thing a person can do is let themselves be seen, be known, be loved despite everything they've been and everything they've done. That was the real miracle of Christmas in Chicago. Not the gifts or the snow or the decorations, but the reminder that redemption sometimes arrives in the most unexpected packages. Wrapped in purple sweaters and delivered with 7-year-old wisdom about happiness being a choice. 3 people had been alone. Now they were family. And that, Min-jae thought as dawn broke over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, was worth more than any empire he could ever build. If you enjoyed the story of redemption and unexpected family, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced a moment where a simple act of kindness changed everything? Let me know your stories. And remember, sometimes the walls we build to protect ourselves become the prisons we need to escape. Until next time, stay kind, stay open, and never underestimate the power of a child's generous heart.